This is an actual training from our Las Vegas mastermind event for our playing clientele within the mastermind. We have our next event coming up, which is in November in Dubai on the Palm, which is the 9th and 10th, Friday and Saturday. If you want the secrets to blow up your fitness business, we are going to be teaching you some bombshell stuff, in particular how to double your business over Black Friday alone. So hit the link below this video. You can get tickets now for the event. We have a maximum sit-in of 10 people who can sit in the room. Now enjoy the training.
All right, guys, so Charlie had some other caption for my presentation today, but I didn't feel like it kind of embodied what we're going to be talking about. So today we're actually going to be talking about why nerds win, and in relation to a service-based client retention strategy. So I am going to need quite a bit of focus from you guys today. I'm going to dip my toe into the deep end a bit so that we can kind of understand the depth at which I feel a knowledge standpoint needs to be from a service-based client retention standpoint. It's kind of my favorite part of coaching is elevating the industry standard of coaching. So when I say that, a lot of people start to think about business systems and lead gen and all this other stuff, and this stuff needs to be present in order to have a successful business. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, winners win, right? If you're good at what you do, you're gonna win. And that's kind of where I focus a lot of my effort, especially with the people who work for the brand and the people that I mentor, is, are you really fucking good at what you do? If you're really good at what you do, you can figure out the rest. You can hire the right people in order to make sure that your business is growing. And so service being the best retention strategy, I do believe knowledge is the largest contributing factor. Does anybody know the difference between depth and breadth in knowledge? Yes? So depth is how deep you understand a single topic. Breadth is like how many topics you have an understanding in to be able to be at least semi-competent in it, okay? So I come from a place where depth and understanding that builds transferable skills actually develops breadth in knowledge. So what that means is if you learn something to every little nuts and bolts and screws that goes into it, you develop the capacity to translate that understanding, the amount of depth for each breath that you take, so each new topic that you go into is going to be that much better than if you just focus on being a jack of all trades. So the example that I use here is squatting for like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, and someone who's trying to play golf or any sort of rotational sport. So I brought Charlie's C4 can up here to kind of try to explain this as like the dip of the toe into the water of what I'm trying to talk about here. So your rib cage and your pelvis create pressure via your two diaphragms. So you have your actual diaphragm that's in your rib cage. You have your pelvic diaphragm. People may know this like your pelvic floor, okay? When you squat, the closer to a tin can that you can be, so the more stacked, the more pressure it takes to be able to smush it, okay? If you start to squish that can, it folds under pressure, right? So when we look at someone who needs a really high capacity to squat, what we need to be able to see is that capacity to be able to hold that pressure really well. Now, if you took this can, and it's gonna be a little damaged from me squeezing it, if you tried to rotate it in the full capacity of the cylindrical can, it's not really gonna budge, right? But if you learn to break the can, disassociate the pelvis and the rib cage, it crumbles, right? So this is the differentiation and adaptation of the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis by itself for these two sports. But the only thing I needed to know is I have a really fucking good understanding of the pelvic diaphragm, the actual diaphragm, and the rib cage mechanics that do with both squatting and rotational sports. All that coming from just understanding the dynamic nature of the rib cage, okay? That's like the dip of the toe into the water. And the reason that I say this is because it's gonna translate into our coaching practice where we're not gonna use that with every person that we work with. I don't want you to use that with every person that you work with because the scalability of that is not very high. What you should be able to do is when it comes across your desk, go to the depth that's needed for the villains that create the solution. So like Corby and I this morning spent about 30 minutes working on some issues that he has in his elbow, okay? If I solve that problem in the next 6 months for him, where he no longer has pain throughout that, the buy-in into what that I do is gonna be so long-term that person is more likely to give me their credit card every single month, right? Hopefully you're selling 6 and 12-month packages like we talked about earlier, but the point being is they're gonna have a longer LTV in your business, okay? So if we get really fucking good at what we do, whether we have to use it or not, we're gonna be able to solve the problem, okay? So we're gonna walk through just kind of training and how I view training and how we need to be able to go into depth from a knowledge perspective. I'm gonna show you what regurgitated information looks like so that you guys can be like, well, that motherfucker is just a copy and paste person. And we're gonna kind of get into like an actual understanding. So anybody that works in physique-based stuff, gen pop, bodybuilding, anything that wants to look good naked, hypertrophy is kind of the realm that you're in, okay? In some way, shape, or form. So a lot of the things that will be cited is like, okay, hypertrophy is maximized from 6 to 30 reps, cool. Frequency should be about 2 times per week. Mechanical tension is the primary stimulus for this, okay? Progressive overload. Pretty basic, okay? My mom knows shit about training, she can understand this, okay? This is the kind of stuff that you see regurgitate through social media, that's great. As we start to go into basic tenets of program design, people who are starting to work their way through the weeds a little bit will understand the dynamic of a scale. So essentially like how much volume you train with is relative to the amount of intensity you train with. So if you train very high volume and you do a lot of work, the proximity to failure is really low. Typically, the higher the proximity to failure or taking it to actual failure, the volume is really low. And we start to kind of learn to manage that from a client-to-client basis, okay? This is where psychological profiles come in. We'll get to that in a second. Don't worry about that. What I do want you to write down is this order of importance, because we need to understand what's actually going to create a result, where we're going to see problems arise, where we're going to build the solution to that problem, and how we're going to keep that client for 2, 3, 4 years because we created that solution to their villain, okay? So execution is the number one thing. Putting them in positions that they can actually perform movement patterns to their capacity is gonna be the best thing that you can do as a coach, okay? I hate it when I see someone that's like the knees over toes guy. Like, that's cool, you've made a great brand for yourself. But that concept is inlaid into an assumption that everybody can do this physically very well. And his whole thing is like, well, he can get you there in 6 months or whatever. The reality of it is you're gonna run into people who can't, right? And you're gonna get people that are defeated, and you need to be able to work with that person to scale back to where they are. Tell them, hey, like we've got a pretty big regression pattern that we have to work through, and then show them what that process looks like as you work through, and then that person's with you for 3 years as you fix that problem, okay? So execution, accurate movement selection according to what they can do. And then we can start talking about training intensity and volume as these people get better at this stuff, okay? If you can't crawl, you can't walk. If you can't walk, you can't run, okay? We have everybody over here prescribing reps and RIR and all this bullshit when they can't even do this, right? So let's take a deep dive, a little bit of a deeper dive into looking into that so that we can kind of start to see what this is. So for those of you guys that want to know, that's my wife. She's a bad bitch, and she is very, very, very dysfunctional when it comes to movement, okay? She's developed a lot of shoulder development. You can see this in this picture because where she's not dysfunctional is everything kind of along the scapular function around the rib cage, okay? She's pretty good when it comes to that. When we look at like quad development, adductor development, lat development, we do see some issues that arise. The reason I point that out is because we need to prevent personal preference from skewing what the client actually needs. So like a lot of people in the class for figure look at Emily and they're like, man, that's what I want, right? Like she's like the epitome of figure. But what they don't understand is she's actually just kind of naturally built like this. For her to actually get better, there's some things that are under the hood that we need to fix, right? So because we have a tendency to have biases towards what we like, and that biases can kind of affect how we coach, we need to be able to create a system of objective analysis where we know where the client wins and where the client loses. What does that look like? That looks like being able to obsess over their villain and how to address that problem, okay? Does that make sense? Just as a framework to kind of start. Cool. All right, so I made a step-by-step dummy guide for y'all to take a picture of and save on your phone so we can go over this in a little bit more detail. step one is going to be a needs analysis and like, what do these people want? What is their physique that they want? What do they want to be able to do? Do they want to walk on a bodybuilding stage, or they want to hit a golf ball 300 yards, or they want to just run with their kids in the backyard? Okay? All these different goals are attached to their pain point. If you solve their pain point, they're going to be a part of your community for a long time. So we need to find it. This is where the consult process is important, your purchase process and kind of how you go about that. And then you need to prioritize this need of the client, whether that's body part or physique related or movement related, and figure out what the structural needs of the person is to assess the movement capacity that's keeping them from getting to where they want to be. Okay, I'm gonna show you how to do that in a second, so don't freak out yet. We're gonna assess the type of client you're working with psychologically so that we know what they can adhere to, okay? I may have the perfect program for fixing Corby's shoulder, but if he's like, man, fuck, I work 90 hours a week trying to build businesses, I can't do this shit, he's not gonna do it, he's not gonna get the solution, right? And then we're gonna assess kind of how they used to train, maybe fix that if we need to, but use that as a baseline to understand what they operate at. And then you're gonna actually write the program, okay? Most of y'all jump here, okay? Let's learn how to not do that. All right, so I'm gonna excuse the people in underwear. This is my realm, physique development, competing. I'm gonna show you some pictures of different individuals so that you can start to conceptualize like structural patterns that we see. And then we can take a deeper dive if you want off lecture. So Tyler is one of my class physique guys. He's like 6'1", hard to tell in this picture, but you can see kind of like long midsection, really small waist. Rib cage is pretty small because that subcostal angle is pretty small here. I have another guy for reference so that you kind of understand. Development-wise, he has a lot of quad sweep, a lot of shoulder development, lacks a little bit of chest development. And so these are kind of the things I'm looking at from a physique standpoint, okay? There's other things that we look at, but we always start at 3 places. Rib cage size, humerus length, femur length, okay? And then these two kind of giving me an idea of how tall that person is as well, okay? So this is what I'm looking for with Tyler, all right? If you kind of look, you can further see, I put this vacuum picture up here so that you can see the rib cage size. You see when he sucks his midsection in, how like small that subcostal angle is? And so we do a structural breakdown of Tyler and we see like, okay, he can pull a vacuum, so his TVA controls really well. Okay, I don't really have to work on that. Big clavicle structure, so he has really wide shoulders. So when I look for big clavicle structure, what I'm looking for next is where does the rib cage go from there? When we look at that, we see the small subcostal angle, so his ability to rotate should be good. Okay, and when we look at the rib cage that is really wide, we can't really rotate as much because of that flared out rib cage position. And then after that, we kind of start to get into building in how we're gonna move the improvements. Now, what I wanna compare him to is Tanner. Now, Tanner is one of my clients. He is 5'5", and he is a tank, okay, to say the least. But if you look here, you can actually see how wide his rib cage line is right here. You see how smushed this way he is, okay? Where did I put that C4 can? Duh, okay. So with smush presentations from the front, you didn't empty this, Charlie. You're gonna see a really wide rib cage from the front, but a really narrow rib cage from the side. With like really small subcostal angles, it'll be really cylindrical from the front and from all angles, okay? So what we're looking for is what does this structural presentation lead to that he functionally can't do 9 times out of 10? You're gonna get anomalies. Tyler is an anomaly, that's why I put him in here, of like a structural person that does something that typically they wouldn't be able to do, okay? And the reason I put Tanner in here is because typically large rib cages have issues rotating femurs because the relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis is not good, which you can see his quad development's not very great, right? Which now leads me to start wondering, okay, well, how does this guy squat, all right? So if you see like someone short and they typically have like really good quad structure, like a lot of quad development, typically a narrow rib cage is associated, all right? So all that to say, we can create some sort of analysis and testing in order to test every client that walks through your door. A lot of you guys aren't working with physique athletes, and I understand that, okay? I use physique athletes because they're shredded and you can see what's going on, okay? You can test this stuff whether you have pictures or not, because there are recurring patterns that happen. I'm going to give you those recurring patterns that happen 9 times out of 10. Okay, so Tanner has a wide rib cage. He has a lack of external rotation at the shoulder, so he can't go like this. He has decent ankle mobility, but poor hip mobility. What did I say comes with wide rib cages? Poor hip mobility, right? Tyler has a narrow rib cage. Narrow rib cages typically have good rotational capacity at the hip, okay? He had that, but his ankle mobility was poor. So what does that mean? He can't really squat very well, right? So he had great quads because his femur could rotate on command, but he didn't really have very good glutes hamstrings because he couldn't reach full depth from the ankle mobility being poor here, all right? And I just did that via a test that does hip capacity and external and internal rotation, a test that does ankle mobility, and then obviously like some external rotation shoulder stuff. So when we look at these two athletes, this program difference is like massively different. Like you couldn't get more yin and yang than this, okay? Tanner with a wide rib cage, poor hip mobility, decent ankle mobility, he's gonna be the most regressed squat pattern that I have in a program. Probably a pendulum squat because it kind of tapers down into the load at the bottom and we're able to deload the bottom position. Tyler can squat really well because he has really good hip mobility. If we just put a block under his foot, we can address the ankle mobility. He's probably gonna be able to barbell back squat, maybe safety bar or Smith machine. So we know that Tyler's capable of doing this, so we can start him there, okay? Now, this is how we start to build functional profiles of people we work with. And what we can do is, I know you guys are big on the build the programs out and ahead of time and then be able to disperse this amongst people. It's very common recurring patterns. You can build these programs out according to the functional, the dysfunction that you find in the everyday human, okay? And so my goal here is to just, like I said, dip your toe into the water of the depth that I'm taking when I write a program, okay? I'm gonna call some of you up here in a second so we can kind of see this in real life. But
an idea is you could set out 12-month programs for each different body type.
That's what I'm saying. You could do like the assessments on the forefront, have them go through it, and then just give them the program that fits the movement dysfunction that they have. Okay, so like for the courses, for the example, in J through U, what I'm touching on today a lot is what's in AHO. It's our Applied Hypertrophy Optimization one. So the programming side's in level 1, but this stuff in depth and how to do it and how to test for it is all AHO. Okay, that's why we have these different courses, because there's depth to each one that can't be taken in a single course. So like if I tried to fit all that into one course, no one would ever take it, right? But if I do like just training and just structural analysis, people start to get into that. So this is like the 5 things that you're gonna find in most every client, okay? Some combination of these 5, okay? This is just how society has developed individuals into kind of seeing these movement dysfunctions. You're not gonna have all 5. You're gonna have some combination of these 5, okay? So let's walk through it. Active shoulder rotation capacity. So there's 2 aspects to this. So rotator cuff testing, basic PT testing, it's pretty easy to test, okay? And ability to externally and internally rotate, okay? So external is pretty much just here. We can do internal rotation tests off the back of the lower back or actually against a band. Active hip rotation capacity. So my ability, let me use my right side because I'm not very good at this, to be able to go like this and be able to go like this. Okay, you can see I have a lot of discrepancy in internal. Okay, like massive discrepancy in internal. Okay, if I go to my left side, what you'll see is I can go in internal a little bit better, but my external sucks, right? So I have a meniscus tear from college golf or from high school golf, and that overuse was from the inability to externally rotate into my left side. All right. So like you have someone coming in with meniscus tear on their par Q, you're like, okay, I'm immediately going to the hip. What do they lack in a rotation capacity at the hip? All right. Ability to maintain brace position. Can they squat and be here? Or when they get under a squat bar, are they like this? Right? How many people you see out here wide-footed, wide stance, painted on a bar with them like this, right? There's so many things that are wrong with that, but a large portion of it is going to be their ability to maintain that brace position, okay? We can do things in a program to build that capacity. Ankle mobility, I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with the wall test, just like seeing how far someone can go from that. And then shoulder stability. So serratus function gets a little wonky because we had to test serratus function in every plane. But the simplest one is a kettlebell bottom under press. So turn a kettlebell upside down, take them through this plane of pressing up and then extending back and then returning here. And can they do that without shaking or without pain, or how far can they translate, or do they expand their rib cage to get there? They should be able to hold this position, so here, with getting all the way back, okay? Questions so far? I know I'm throwing a lot at you guys. All right. So basically what we're doing is once we do this testing, we confirm the needs of the client. So I put this into 3 categories: priority, middle of the road, and strong things that they do. So if you had someone came to you that was a really good squatter, but they couldn't get into the overhead very well, like squatting would be like a strong capacity with lower priority. And then overhead access would be the priority in addressing that in a program. Now, the caveat to this is if any of you coach girls that want big butts, if they're good squatters, let them keep squatting, right? They're gonna need that, right? Like it's a development thing at that point. But we need to break them down into priority to be able to write the split according to how much time needs to be spent in each one. So I put back development here just as an example of how I do this, because Tyler's priority is back development. So his ability to align force through the lat, so just his ability to tuck his elbow here, okay? Can we assess how serratus function doesn't allow him to do that? Implement some things that address it and pick movements that fit his structure. Pretty easy, okay? I'm just putting this in his client folder so that I'm aware of it, okay? If any of you have coached over 100 clients, you know that remembering everybody's problems is not gonna happen, right? I've ran 160, 170 at a time, and trust me, note-taking is your best friend, right? So we've built the capacity of someone to manage this. We've learned how to take notes on what they're able to do. We've broken them down into priority before we write the program. But what can the client psychologically handle, all right? There's 3 primary psychological profiles that I see when it comes to training programs for people. And so I'm gonna run through those real quick and how we can manage that. So the overtrainer. This is the person who spends a shit ton of time in the gym, really long sessions. They're often training a lot per week, 6 to 7 days, and they kind of have a do more mentality, okay? The best thing that we can do for that person is rein it in, okay? They're probably not doing quality work if they're training at extremely high volumes. They're probably just doing shit, to be honest. They're just going in there, kind of throwing some weight around and not really actually creating a result. You're gonna buy them back more time, which is a finite resource, right? They're gonna do better work, they're less likely to get injured, they're gonna get better results. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me, right? So that's the overtrainer. Just break up the sessions and lower the volume and then work on the quality. The meticulous progressive overload person is the person who tracks everything, okay? You guys might not experience this as much as I do, but I get this quite frequently. They typically are following some PPL variation. Logbook wins, Charlie. We've had this conversation a few times, right? And it kind of wins over the ability to actually perform the movement well, right? So this is the person who wants to take the Instagram video of them squatting 5 plates, 6 plates, deadlifting 4 plates, whatever it is. And they have that emotional attachment to that because when they post that lift, what happens? Dopamine, right? So they get that feedback of, oh my God, you're so strong. Or maybe their attachment from a business development side is their capacity to be able to do that, right? If you work with people who are coaches as well, you'll see a very large emotional attachment to their logbook progressions. And your role as a coach is to reset the execution standards and tell them that what they're doing is not actually progressing them, right? And so we a lot of times with this person, the tracking needs to be a little bit higher. So your check-in system needs to be a little more detailed, okay? But because they're a meticulous progressive overload, that's the kind of system they like. They like numbers, they like data, they like tracking. And so you give them what they want, right? This is how I said, yesterday I said I have like 5 different check-in systems. I'm doing that, I'm picking the one that's needed according to the psychology of the client.
Do you think a certain personality type needs to be that?
Yeah, I do find that it's typically like your high achievers, like entrepreneurs, business owners, lawyers, doctors tend to do this quite a bit as well. Anybody that's like numbers based and or like high performers tends to kind of land in that category unless they don't have much fitness exposure. This is also typically the person that's been in the industry for 4, 5, 6 years, okay? So they do have some sort of exposure to like doing things semi-well or making sure that they're like ticking their boxes, but the reality is they're just hiding things that they can't actually do well with the logbook numbers that are actually progressing, okay? Last one is the no structure to training. This is your, what's the thing girls like to hang up? Dream catchers? Yeah, the dream catcher things. These are your dream catcher people. So like the frilly, do things not in a schedule plan type people. They train based off feel. They have a different program every week. They don't really train the same amount every week. So really your whole role as a coach is to give them structure, but build autonomy in that structure. They like this because they get to choose what they do on a day-to-day, right? So if we can have the program be like the first 2 to 3 main movements, and then have bicep curl of choice or lateral raise of choice and then tricep push down of choice. It gives them the freedom to be able to be like, yes, I'm still getting to choose what I do this week. In reality, the big core work that they're doing is the same every fucking week. I'll even write rotational programs for these people. So like these people do well with like back squatting week 1 or odd weeks and then hack squatting even weeks. So it'll be like back, hack, or something along those lines where they're doing a different pattern every other week.
Did we talk about how you determine which client is which?
Like a psychological analysis. A lot of it's what they've previously been doing.
So you just ask them?
I asked for that information on the forefront. So I have an information sheet that they fill out post-consult. So I have information that I get from like a health perspective, a drugs perspective, a nutrition perspective, and a goal perspective coming into the consult. So that's pre-purchase and the purchase. From purchase into post-purchase, I have a longer version of that that details out what they do. What you'll find, these people will barely fucking fill it out. These people will give you every single data point they've had for the last year. And these people just be like, I train hard. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So like the more you do this, the more you kind of pick up on like verbiage with psychologies, and you just kind of give them the same sheet that you give everyone, and then how they fill it out tells you a lot about how they are. And then you'll see trends over time, just like you do with the injury profiles. So we've done a lot of fucking work. We still haven't wrote the program yet. But we're gonna write it now, okay? So the reason I wait this long into doing this and show you guys this is because, I'm gonna just be honest, there's levels to this shit, right? You don't have to do this with every client, right? I'm not saying you need to, but if you need to do it to be able to solve the problem, you need to be able to do all this shit, okay? So we're gonna go from, like Tyler has a pretty big back dominance need in his physique. So he's got back 3 times per week in this 10-day rotation. It's coming after an off day every time. So he trains legs here, he has off, and then he does pull, chest, off, back. And then the only time he trains back where he doesn't is when it's touch-up work. So he's getting like some arm work with just like 1 or 2 movements of back work, okay? This is me prioritizing recovery capacity around those back sessions. And then by seeing that frequency higher than 2 times per week because the need's really high for this athlete, okay? Let's put it in different terms, okay? Let's say you have an athlete, a female, who wants to grow a big ass, okay? That's a pretty common goal. I'm probably gonna have her training glutes here, here, and here, okay? Or if it's a 10-day rotation like I have, it's like kind of 4 and 7, 1, 4, and 7, right? A lot of people are gonna need a set schedule though. They can't do this 10-day thing, right? And so we kind of condense it into off day with back, and then they're just less frequency in how often he hits back. And so you would do the same thing with the girl that wants the bigger glutes. She's probably doing compound glute work here. She's probably doing isolated glute work here, and then she's doing compound glute work here, right? Because ass is the goal. Does that make sense? Okay, now we can take that concept and apply it to everything. So it's like, do we have a shoulder we need to fix? Okay, we're gonna spend a lot of time fixing that shoulder across the week. Did you have a question, Corby? No. You're just moving. Cool. All right. Not last thing, but last thing when it comes to like program design specifically. So prep work, things we do before a session, is one of the best ways to prepare someone for a session to prevent injuries and the best ways to actually fix an injury, okay? Now, I have a system for how I work people through prep work. It's called access, activate, integrate. Fancy way of saying you're gonna stretch first, okay? If you need to do any stretching to gain access to a position, so like you're squatting, you can't internally rotate your femur, I'm gonna do something that stretches my adductor, okay? If you have someone who can't use their glute well, I'm probably gonna put them into a hip airplane where they go into that single-legged RDL and then shut the hip and use the glute to stabilize, okay? This is kind of where we're like starting to move into activate. So access is stretching, activate is isolated patterns like the hip airplane, integrate is using whatever that first movement is to actually piece all this together. So for an example, if you're squatting or you're doing, if you have like a squat day, internal rotation stretch is how you would access. Step offs is another way you can activate glute. So like up on a box, going down until you touch the ground with this foot and then coming back. Single-legged RDL into walking lunge to make sure they're warm and able to do something that's semi-close to a squat pattern. Now, I'm not getting into gait cycle today, that's just too much. But I put this here because I'm testing their gait cycle, like how they walk, which Charlie's about to show us here in a second. I'm not gonna dive too deep into this. So the volume levels that we look at, there's actually a paper that showed how many sets they were performing dictates fairly closely to how much sets they need to perform to actually gain a result. So they took like a comparison of like low volume trainers and high volume trainers, and they essentially tried to match hypertrophy by giving a portion of the low volume trainers high volume and a portion of the high volume trainers low volume and see what happened. What they found is they actually lowered their ability to gain tissue by taking them to the other extreme in range, okay? So what that means is if you have someone that trains a shit ton and their quality's crap, well, let's dial it back a bit, but let's not pull them all the way to a low volume program, okay? Let's dial it back, let's improve the quality, and then we'll kind of start to move as we go along working with this athlete into something that's a little bit lower volume. If we have someone whose quality is really high, but their volume is extremely low and they're not getting results, let's start titrating up a little bit here and there, okay? That's just kind of like the main questions I ask when I have someone coming in. This is just a representation of that adaptation. So like we have 3 places of response when it comes to programming. So MEV is like the minimum amount of volume you can do to retain tissue, okay? This is where they maximally grow. Most programs should land somewhere in here. Even if you're progressing volume over a period of time, it should stay within the confines of this peak area of the curve. And then MRV is where you start seeing performance dip off, okay? If performance is dipping off, you need to pull them out of the gym very quickly, okay? All right, accessory work, this is just like learning how to program. Basically, the simplistic answer to this portion is for ab training and calf training, the biggest thing is consistency because it's boring as shit for most people, right? So doing it where it's 2 to 3 times per week is plenty sufficient. Doing it at the start of a session that it's not gonna affect the rest of the session is typically best. The only caveat I had to this is ab work. Pretty much, so calf work I do at the beginning of a session, ab work I don't. Basically, every movement you do in a gym has some dynamic relationship of how you maintain your rib cage to your pelvis. That level of how much is dependent upon what you're doing, but to go into any of these major movements with fatigue in that midsection portion that's maintaining that for you is a problem. So with ab work, what I do is not doing it before I squat or hinge or any heavy bracing based leg days, and I'm doing it at the end of the session because it can affect your ability to maintain that position. Where with calf work, I'm doing it at the start. I'm picking 2 movements that they like, putting it on one upper day and one other upper day, because if we actually do calf work before legs, so femoral rotation has an aspect in squatting, but so does tibial rotation. Calf pump, kind of through the gastroc and the soleus and the tibias, and the anterior tibia. oh my God, anterior tibialis can actually limit the ability of that tibia to move. So we don't want to go into squatting after having done all this calf work, is the simple way to say that. So the calf work should be done away from the lower body compound work. Now, take a picture of this, okay, because I'm not going to talk about the whole thing. Deloading is something that I get a lot of questions about. I have a lot of people who like to pre-program them, have a lot of people who like to interact or intuitively program them, so like based off feedback on a week-to-week basis. It all works. The better question to ask is, when do we know someone needs a deload, okay? So we can actually run through these questions on the check-in form, okay? So like let's say you typically pre-program deloads at every 8 weeks or every 12 weeks, right? On that 8th week or on that 12th week, you can send these questions out in an email that's pre-drafted and pre-put in to an automated email system where they send this back as an answer, and you can see whether they actually need the deload or not. Okay? This is from Erica Helms' Muscle and Strength Pyramid. If you don't have this book, buy this book. But it's just a great way to ask the question of like, is motivation to train decreased? Yes or no? Sleep quality decreased? Decrease in performance? If you answer yes to 0 to 1 of these, you're typically good to keep going. If you say yes to 2 or more, it's time to deload. Make sense? What you can do is, I actually integrate this into my check-in form, where if you get 2 reds out of the 4 questions, then it's time to deload. All right, in summary. Whew, we made it, guys. All right, in summary, depth of knowledge is the best way to retain clients. The reason I believe that it's the best way is because anybody can teach you business systems, anybody can implement business systems, you can hire the right people to do that stuff, okay? Knowledge is the most bulletproof retention strategy, and it's a great way to differentiate yourself in the market. Why do I say that, okay? How many people, when they have to go film content, they get to the camera and they're like, what the fuck am I gonna talk about? Like, I've recorded all these reels on training, I've pretty much done everything that I know, like, how am I gonna make something new, okay? If I have a large depth of knowledge, that's like an infinity pool of content, right? The transferable skills retain the clients because no matter the problem, you're able to handle it. And in the words of Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last, right? So,
Is he from Alabama as well?
it's, have you not seen Ricky Bobby?
Of course.
Okay, all right. I was about to say, we're about to have movie night. It's a Southern legend. Okay, so really the biggest thing is if you win for your client, right? If you don't have the skills to win for your client, you're not gonna win. You're gonna lose. They're gonna go somewhere else. They're gonna pay somebody else their money, okay? Winning looks different for everybody, right? Like the mom with 4 kids probably just wants to feel like a normal human and sexy in her clothes. A physique athlete, if they lose, they're probably going to someone else, right? So that process looks different, but in the end, it's just, do you have the knowledge base in order to handle that, right? There's gonna be cases where you have to dig deeper into that knowledge base. We learned how to map out a needs analysis step by step, and then how structural presentation can affect that exercise selection, and how we can actually go deep to build a program that's accurate to the things that we see on a week-to-week basis. So this is where I cut mine into questions. Just a reminder, today's the last day to get the discounts on the courses. So you're getting a second email today that's gonna come out with the link for the bundle for level 1, AHO, and the female module. If you just want any one of those things by themselves, you can use the Charlie 100 code for $100 off any single course, and then you guys can just get into that and get plugged in and kind of learn a little bit what we're about, okay? It is gonna end at midnight tonight, so urgency if we can. Because 1, we've never done this bundle deal before, and I can guarantee you it's not coming back soon, okay? So if you guys have any questions, thank you. Y'all have been fantastic, and thank you for letting me dip into the deep end today and the patience to do that.
Yes,